The fall of a princess. The stars had always been Zevra's home. Now, they were nothing more than distant, unreachable lights as her escape pod hurtled toward an unfamiliar planet. Her breathing was ragged, her golden skin bruised from the struggle aboard her ship. She had been betrayed, her own council had turned against her, branding her unfit to rule. She barely managed to evade the assassins sent to silence her. But the damage had been done. Her only chance of survival had been this desperate escape, and now, as the pod systems failed one by one, she realized she might not survive at all. The pod's alarms screamed as she broke through the atmosphere. A fiery descent. A crash. Then, darkness. A new world. When Zevra's eyes fluttered open, the sky above her was no longer the endless black of space but a soft, pale blue. Wind brushed against her skin, carrying the scent of earth, grass, and something unfamiliar. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her side. A wound, a deep gash from the fight aboard her ship. Weakness was unacceptable. She needed to move. With great effort, she pushed herself up, her golden eyes scanning the terrain. Trees surrounded her, their tall forms stretching toward the sky. This world was primitive. But it would have to do. A rustling sound made her freeze. Someone was coming. Her fingers tightened around the small blade she had managed to keep, but before she could react, a figure stepped into view. A human. A male. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp green eyes that narrowed as he took in the wreckage behind her. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, he spoke. Didn't expect to find a survivor. Zevra tensed. Did he know what she was? She couldn't afford to take that risk. I need help, she said carefully, forcing herself to sound weak. If humans were anything like the stories she had read, they were overly compassionate creatures. The man studied her for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, he knelt beside her. Looks like you don't have much of a choice, he muttered. As he reached for her arm, Zevra wondered if she had just exchanged one danger for another. A reluctant rescuer. The human took her to a small shelter, a cabin in the woods, far from any major settlements. A hiding place. Zevra observed everything as he treated her wounds with primitive medical supplies. He was skilled, his hands steady, his movements efficient. A soldier, she realized. That could be either a blessing or a curse. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated. Giving her real name was dangerous, but a false one could make her seem suspicious. Zevra. He didn't react to it. If the name meant anything to him, he didn't show it. Relan, he said. A simple name. A simple introduction. And yet, Zevra could tell there was nothing simple about this man. Secrets and suspicions. Over the next few days, Zevra's strength slowly returned. Relan was cautious around her, watching her with the sharp gaze of someone used to spotting lies. She had to be careful. Humans weren't supposed to know about Enetheri. The Galactic Council had strict laws about revealing themselves to primitive worlds. And yet, here she was. Every night, she tried to repair the small communicator hidden in the remains of her suit. If she could just send a signal. But the device remained silent. She was stranded. And she was running out of time. Because Relan wasn't the only one watching her. Something lurked in the forest beyond the cabin. Something that did not belong to this world. And Zevra knew. Her enemies had followed her here. The Reluctant Alliance. Zevra was no stranger to danger. She had been trained from birth to rule, to understand the weight of command. But here, on this primitive world, hunted and alone, she felt something unfamiliar. Helplessness. She despised the feeling. But survival came first. And survival meant playing along with the human, at least for now. Whispers in the dark. The night air was heavy, thick with moisture from an earlier rain. The dim glow of a lantern flickered inside the cabin as Reland sat near the table, sharpening a knife. Zevra watched him from her spot on the small cot, her wounds healing faster than he probably expected. Humans had an unsettling way of making silence feel loud. She shifted slightly, testing the limits of her recovering body. Outside, the trees whispered with movement, but this wasn't the rustling of wind through leaves. She knew better. Something was out there. They've found me. Her voice was quiet but certain. Reland paused, the blade in his hands motionless. Who? She hesitated. How much could she tell him? How much should she tell him? Not your concern, she said finally. His sharp green eyes flicked toward her. You're hiding something. She didn't deny it. But before either of them could say more, the noise outside grew louder. A branch snapped. Then another. They weren't alone anymore. A fight for survival. Reland was already on his feet, moving with the precision of a trained soldier. He grabbed a rifle from the wall and motioned for her to stay put. She didn't listen. Zevra reached for the blade he had left on the table and followed him outside. The forest was eerily still. The usual sounds of nocturnal creatures had vanished, replaced by an unnatural quiet. Then, a blur of movement. A figure lunged from the darkness, its form shifting unnaturally fast. Reland fired without hesitation, the gunshot echoing through the trees. The attacker staggered but didn't fall. Zevra didn't wait. She moved with practiced efficiency, slicing through the air with her stolen blade. Her strike was clean, aimed for a weak point at the base of the creature's skull. It collapsed with a choked hiss. But there was more than one. From the shadows, more figures emerged, Enetheri bounty hunters. Her people. But not her allies. A desperate escape. Reland swore under his breath. I'm guessing you do know these guys. Zevra didn't answer. There wasn't time. One of the bounty hunters raised a weapon, a sleek pulse rifle designed to incapacitate. She shoved Reland aside just as the shot fired. Pain tore through her side as the blast struck. Her vision blurred, her body refusing to move properly. Reland didn't hesitate. He fired twice, his bullets finding their marks with deadly precision. 2 hunters fell, but more were closing in. Zevra fought against the paralysis creeping through her limbs. We have to move. Reland glanced at her, assessing the situation. Then, without warning, he scooped her up and ran. She hated being carried. She hated being weak. But for now, she clung to consciousness as Reland led them deeper into the forest, away from the threat. A human stubbornness. By the time they stopped, they were miles from the cabin. The bounty hunters wouldn't stop searching, but they had bought some time. Reland set her down against a tree, his breathing steady despite the exertion. Okay, he said. You're gonna tell me what the hell is going on. Zevra's body was still sluggish from the blast, but she forced herself to sit up. They're Enetheri, she admitted. They want me dead. Reland didn't look surprised. Yeah, I figured that much. The real question is why. She hesitated. Trusting a human went against everything she had been taught. But Reland had just risked his life to save hers. And she wasn't sure she could survive this alone. Finally, she met his gaze. Because I am their princess. His expression didn't change immediately. Then, after a long moment, he let out a short, incredulous laugh. Well, he muttered. Didn't see that coming. A fragile alliance. They made camp for the night in a small clearing. Reland tended to her wounds, his movements careful but efficient. You're taking this well, she remarked. He smirked. I've seen weird things before. She studied him. You're a soldier. Was, he corrected. Not anymore. She didn't press further. Instead, she focused on the reality of their situation. The bounty hunters wouldn't stop. They had limited supplies. And worst of all, she was running out of time. Her only chance to reclaim her throne was to return to her people. But to do that, she needed a way off this planet. A ship. A strategy. A plan. She had none of those things. But she had Raylan. And maybe, just maybe, he could help her. A deal with destiny. A desperate proposal. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows against the dense forest. Zevra sat across from Raylan, her golden eyes sharp despite the exhaustion weighing down on her. The bounty hunters would return soon, she had no doubt about that. They needed a plan. But first, she needed to convince him. "You're serious," Raylan said, rubbing a hand over his face. "As serious as the wound on my side," Zevra replied, barely suppressing a wince. The pulse blast had done more damage than she let on, but she refused to appear weak. Raylan leaned back against a fallen log. "You're saying the only way you can go home is if I pretend to be your mate?" He said the word like it was a curse. Zevra didn't flinch. "It is Enotheri law. A royal in exile may return with a chosen mate as proof of strength. A ruler cannot rule alone." Raylan scoffed. "That's a pretty outdated system." "Perhaps," she admitted. "But I do not make the rules. I only know how to bend them." He stared at her for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in his green eyes. "And what exactly do I get out of this?" Zevra lifted her chin. "Wealth. Technology beyond anything your people have. Or perhaps even a new life beyond this planet." Raylan remained silent. She knew he wasn't an ordinary man. He had the sharp instincts of a warrior, but there was something else beneath the surface: restlessness. A man who had left the battlefield but had not yet found his place in the world. A man like that could be swayed. Finally, he exhaled and said, "You really think they'll believe it? That I'm your mate?" Zevra smirked. "I think you underestimate my people's ignorance about humans. They believe themselves superior in every way. If I tell them you are my mate, they will believe me." Raylan let out a dry laugh. "Well, that's insulting." She tilted her head. "It's an advantage." He shook his head, muttering something she didn't quite catch before fixing her with a serious look. "All right, princess. You've got yourself a deal." Preparations for deception. They spent the next 2 days moving carefully through the wilderness, staying ahead of the bounty hunters. Zevra tested Raylan constantly, questioning him about Enotheri customs, making sure he could act the part. He learned quickly, much to her surprise. But pretending to be her mate wasn't just about knowledge. It was about presence. "You look uncomfortable," she noted as he stood stiffly beside her. Raylan scowled. "Maybe because this is ridiculous." She stepped closer, pressing a hand lightly to his chest. He tensed. "If you act like this in front of my people, they will see through our deception." Raylan sighed and placed a hesitant hand on her waist. "Better?" Zevra studied him. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. It will have to be. What she didn't expect was the flicker of something strange in her chest. Something unfamiliar. She ignored it. They had a mission to complete. Stealing a way home. Securing a ship wasn't easy. They tracked the bounty hunters to a landing site, a small vessel hidden deep in the forest, waiting to extract them once they found Zevra. Raylan studied the area through binoculars. 2 guards outside. Probably more inside. Zevra assessed their weapons. "We need to disable their communications first." Raylan glanced at her. "I can handle that. You just focus on getting us inside." She arched a brow. Giving orders now, are you? He smirked. You want to pull this off or not? Zevra let it slide. They moved quickly, Raylan taking out the comms relay while Zevra used her knowledge of Enotheri ships to override the security lock. By the time the guards realized what was happening, it was too late. The ship's engines roared to life as they shot into the sky, leaving Earth behind. Zevra exhaled slowly. They were finally going home. The return to Enotheri space. The moment they entered Enotheri-controlled space, Zevra sent a transmission to the royal palace. It didn't take long for a response. Her message had been clear: Princess Zevra, alive and returning, with her chosen mate at her side. The council had no choice but to acknowledge it. As they approached the capital, Raylan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. So, what happens if they don't believe us? Zevra's expression hardened. Then we die. Raylan groaned. Great. Love this plan. She ignored him. The moment the ship landed, an honor guard was waiting. High Counselor Veyron, her greatest enemy, stood at the front, his expression unreadable. Zevra stepped forward, her posture regal. Raylan followed. And the deception began. Returning to the stars. The Enotheri capital was nothing like Raylan had expected. As they stepped off the ship, he found himself staring at towering crystalline spires that shimmered under an artificial sky. The entire city seemed to pulse with energy, a blend of advanced technology and ancient architecture. But he had little time to admire it. Because all eyes were on him. He wasn't just an outsider. He was human. And he was claiming to be the mate of their lost princess. Walking into the lion's den. Zevra moved with the same regal confidence she had shown since the moment they met, her golden eyes unreadable. Raylan did his best to match her stride, resisting the urge to fidget under the weight of dozens of judging gazes. At the front of the gathered Enotheri stood High Counselor Veyron. His violet robes were pristine, his long silver hair flowing over his shoulders. But his expression, carefully neutral, gave away nothing. When he spoke, his voice was smooth but edged with cold authority. Princess Zevra, he said. We thought you lost. I survived, Zevra replied, her tone even. And I have returned to claim what is mine. Veyron's gaze flickered to Raylan. With this? Raylan fought the urge to roll his eyes. He had expected hostility, but the sheer disdain in Veyron's voice was almost impressive. Zevra didn't flinch. Yes. This is Raylan Var. My chosen mate. A murmur rippled through the gathered nobles. Raylan caught snippets of disbelief. A human? She cannot be serious. This is a disgrace to the royal line. Veyron raised a single brow. Then you will not object to proving it. Raylan tensed. I don't like the sound of that. Zevra's expression darkened. What proof do you require? Veyron's lips curled slightly. By law, a royal bond must be publicly displayed. A test of unity and strength, witnessed by the High Council. Raylan wasn't sure what that meant, but judging by Zevra's clenched fists, it wasn't good. She turned to him, voice low. They want a ritual. He sighed. Why do I feel like this ritual isn't just us shaking hands and calling it a day? It is a trial, she admitted. A test of trust between mates. If we fail, our bond will be deemed false. And if it's deemed false? They will execute us both. Raylan let out a slow breath. Of course they will. The trial of unity. The grand hall was filled with Enotheri nobles, each watching with predatory curiosity as Raylan and Zevra were led to the center. A circular platform hovered above the floor, lined with glowing runes. Veyron stood at the edge, addressing the crowd. The bond trial is simple. If they are truly mated, they will complete the ritual. If they are not, the truth will reveal itself. Relan turned to Zevra. And what exactly does this ritual involve? Zevra exhaled. A mental link. Relan blinked. A what? She hesitated, then continued, the ritual forces our minds to connect. Our thoughts, emotions, and memories will be shared. If we are truly bound, we will endure it. If not, the link will break, Veyron finished for her. And with it, their lives. Relan clenched his jaw. He didn't like this. But backing out wasn't an option. The platform activated beneath their feet, and the world blurred. Inside each other's minds. At first, Relan felt nothing. Then, a pull. Suddenly, he wasn't standing on the platform anymore. He was falling through darkness, through flashes of unfamiliar memories. He saw Zevra as a child, training with a sword far too big for her hands. He saw her standing before an Enetheri council, face unreadable as they stripped her of her title. He saw her running, escaping into the stars, alone and afraid. The emotions hit him like a wave. Pain. Determination. The crushing weight of exile. Then it shifted. He felt his own memories pulled to the surface, his time as a soldier, the battles fought on distant worlds. The loneliness that had settled in his bones long before he ever met her. And for the first time, he realized. They weren't so different. They had both been lost. Both searching for something more. The connection forms. When Relan opened his eyes, he was back on the platform. Zevra was staring at him, her expression unreadable. But he could feel her emotions now, her uncertainty, her guarded hope. The connection had worked. The crowd was silent. Then Veyron spoke, his voice laced with reluctant acknowledgement. The bond is real. A mixture of shock and outrage rippled through the nobles, but the law was clear. Relan and Zevra had passed the trial. And now, she had the right to reclaim her throne. But as Relan met her gaze, he realized something. This wasn't over. Not yet. Because Veyron wasn't finished. And neither were their enemies. The final battle for the throne. Whispers of rebellion. The moment the trial ended, Relan knew the fight wasn't over. Yes, they had proven their bond. Yes, the law was on their side. But law meant nothing to those unwilling to accept it. As he and Zevra stepped down from the platform, he could feel the weight of the Enetheri nobles' stares. Some were furious. Others were merely shocked. And then there were those, like Veyron, who remained coldly calculating. Zevra kept her expression neutral, but through their newfound link, Relan could sense her unease. "We need to leave," she murmured under her breath. Relan didn't argue. As they exited the grand hall, he kept a hand close to his sidearm. He had a feeling they weren't going to leave unchallenged. The trap is sprung. They barely made it to the royal chambers before the first attack came. A blade whistled through the air, aimed directly at Zevra's throat. Relan reacted on instinct, shoving her aside and catching the assassin's wrist. A masked Enetheri twisted against his grip, moving with inhuman speed. But Relan had fought Enetheri before. He twisted sharply, breaking the assassin's wrist before slamming him into the nearest wall. A second attacker lunged from the shadows. Zevra met them with a blade of her own. In moments, the fight was over. The assassins lay motionless at their feet. Zevra wiped her blade clean, her golden eyes burning with anger. Veyron moves faster than I anticipated. Relan exhaled, rolling his shoulder. You think he sent them? She nodded. He will not accept my return. Not without blood. Relan smirked. Then let's give him a fight. Rallying the warriors. Zevra led him deep into the palace, where a hidden passage took them to an underground barracks. Inside, a group of Enetheri warriors stood waiting. Relan recognized some of them from the hall, those who had remained silent during the trial. One stepped forward, a tall, scarred woman with dark violet skin and piercing silver eyes. "Princess," she said, bowing slightly. "We have awaited your return." Zevra's expression hardened. "Then you know why I am here." The woman nodded. "Veyron grows bolder by the day. He does not just seek to deny you the throne, he seeks to rewrite Enotheri law itself. If he succeeds, he will rule unchallenged." Rielan crossed his arms. "Then we stop him." The warrior smirked. "Easier said than done, human." Zevra stepped forward. "I do not ask for blind loyalty. But the council will meet tomorrow to decide my fate. Veyron will not wait for debate, he will strike before then." She lifted her chin. "I intend to strike first." A moment of silence. Then, the warrior knelt. As it should be. One by one, the others followed. The battle for the throne had begun. Storming the palace. They moved at dawn. The palace guards were already on alert, but Zevra's warriors knew the hidden paths. They moved through the corridors like shadows, cutting down Veyron's men before alarms could sound. Rielan stayed close to Zevra, covering her as she led them toward the council chamber. The doors burst open, revealing Veyron standing at the head of the chamber, surrounded by his own forces. He didn't even look surprised. "You truly are your mother's daughter," he mused. "Always so eager for bloodshed." Zevra's grip on her blade tightened. "Surrender, Veyron. You have lost." Veyron chuckled. "Have I?" Then the floor shook. Rielan barely had time to react before an explosion ripped through the chamber. The final duel. Smoke filled the air. The battle erupted in chaos. Rielan fought through Veyron's guards, his gun flashing in the dim light. But his focus was on Zevra. She had reached Veyron. And the duel had begun. Their blades clashed, silver against gold, ancient techniques meeting in a deadly dance. Veyron was fast, but Zevra was faster. She struck low, forcing him to retreat. But Veyron was not without tricks. A hidden blade flashed from his sleeve, aimed straight for Zevra's heart. Rielan moved before he could think. He threw himself between them. Pain exploded in his side. He hit the ground. Zevra's scream echoed in his ears. Then. A final strike. Veyron collapsed, his blade slipping from his hands. The battle was over. A throne reclaimed. Rielan woke to the sound of voices. His vision blurred, but he recognized Zevra immediately. She was kneeling beside him, pressing something warm against his wound. "You are an idiot," she muttered. Rielan coughed. "You're welcome." She exhaled sharply, but there was something in her eyes. Something softer. She stood, turning to the remaining council members. "It is done," she declared. "Veyron is dead. The Enotheri people will not be ruled by fear." Silence. Then, one by one, the council members bowed. Zevra had won. She was queen. And Rielan. Well. He was still technically her mate. Not that he minded.